Hi, thanks for joining. Please make sure you subscribe to follow us on all the various platforms here on the podcast, as well as on YouTube. The stuff we write on Substack, as well as quick takes on Instagram and on Threads. If you're enjoying what we're putting out there, please make sure you're sharing with all your friends and family. And if you have questions or comments about the stuff we're putting out there, please make sure you leave them in comments to us. We'd be more than happy to cover them in future talks. There are a lot of quips, a lot of phrases, a lot of buzzwords, a lot of jargon that gets used by professionals that are used to communicate between professionals certain things that get sent out into the world that make us all sound like we're experts in everything, even though we're only experts in very few things within the world of healthcare, within the world of fitness, within the world of wellness. A lot of these buzzwords, a lot of these quips, a lot of these phrases may mean something in communication between professionals, but do not actually mean anything when we actually look at what we're truly talking about when we are using these words in real life situations. So, these quips, these phrases, these buzzwords, what do they mean? How do we use them? And what should we be aware of when we hear people using them as relates to our overall health, our overall wellness? Well, let's talk about that.
Warning. The following presentation contains information that might contradict what you have previously heard, or believed to be true, about how the human body works, and contains material that is not suitable for closed-minded individuals. Enjoy.
When we start looking at some of these quips, some of these phrases, there's a couple of things that we have to take into account, a couple of things that we have to start to kind of coalesce some of the discussions around. Very similar to what we talked about previously in terms of some of the kind of jargon that gets thrown out there, where we like using words, we like using phrases that sound good, that sound well-meaning. But when we actually get down to what we're actually trying to discuss, trying to have a conversation about, the words themselves are meaningless. The words themselves do not have or do not impart the actual definition that we want within the conversation. And I think it's very important to kind of have this conversation, particularly with some of the ways in which the healthcare within the United States is starting to move, particularly with some of the public health advocacies that's taking place based off of the change in administration and some of the stances that is taking place within the Health and Human Services within the HHS of the United States. That's making it very difficult to have some very good intelligent conversations with people. One of the things that has started to become kind of buzzworthy within the realm of wellness, within the realm of healthcare, within the realm of fitness, is this idea about metabolic health. It's nothing new. It's stuff that we've been discussing, and stuff that I've been writing about, stuff I've been researching on for quite some time. When we're looking at this idea about metabolic health, what we're really looking at is we're looking at the impact that chronic inflammation has on the body and how chronic inflammation is going to cause disruptions in terms of oxidative stress. That oxidative stress causes dysfunction, DYS, in terms of the dysfunction. And that dysfunction leads to dysregulation, DYS, in terms of the dysregulation. And the DYS function and the DYS regulation that is taking place, when we start looking at how the cells are functioning within the body, leads to a disruption in the cell's balance points, within the cell's optimal function, the cell's quote unquote homeostasis. The idea about this homeostasis as relates to this metabolic health idea and is about optimal performance, about optimal condition response. It's not about stable. It's not about having stability. It's not about having even a level playing field, the way in which, if we look at textbook definitions for homeostasis, it's where the body itself is functioning like Baby Bear in terms of the Goldilocks story, where everything is just right. This is where, when I discuss and when I teach homeostasis, I don't do it in terms of Goldilocks, because the way in which we think about the story is actually backwards. It's Baby Bear that everything is just right. Goldilocks is simply just finding the just right. And so when we start looking at this idea about having everything in the optimal area, in the optimal level of everything, the idea about metabolic health. The idea is that, so the idea about metabolic health is that we are functioning optimally, particularly when we start looking at the way in which the mitochondria within the body is functioning, the mitochondria within the cells are functioning for the body. And unfortunately, this idea about proper function has been kind of corrupted. And it goes into this idea that, okay, we'll use this word metabolic health, and the idea that if we have some dysregulation in our normal metabolism, we will become unhealthy, which it's accurate. It's true. And it's true to a certain extent, but the problem is that the corruption that we get within that idea is kind of spearheaded by the person that is being nominated to be the Surgeon General for the United States. And it's stipulated within their book, quote unquote, Good Energy. That's the title of it. I'm not advertising for it. I'm not even saying go ahead and read it. I don't recommend reading it. It's not a book that is giving good information to you. It's a book that's giving biased information to you. And that biased information, that biased perspective is kind of clouding the perspective of the person that is presenting the argument and presenting themselves as a healthcare professional. The idea about metabolic health, the idea that we look at as it relates to the oxidative stress issues, and the idea about oxidative stress and the idea about metabolic dysregulation leading to metabolic disruption, and metabolic disruption leading to disease is acknowledged. It's acknowledged in my work. It's acknowledged in my research. It's acknowledged in my publications, particularly when we start looking at the fitness and fatness continuum and the issues that we get in terms of excessive fatness leading to excessive fatness signals leading to inflammation signals, and inflammation signals leading to oxidative stress, and then oxidative stress leading to anabolic dysregulation, and then anabolic dysregulation leading to the metabolic diseases, the non-communicable diseases. The idea behind the metabolic health is if we can correct this dysregulation that's taking place, we're able to go ahead and offset any of the disease situations that might be taking place. And because we're able to offset any of the disease situations that might be taking place, then what we're able to do is we're able to get the person back to a healthy state. But the problem is that we have to go back and understand metabolism and understand what we're actually looking at when we're starting to look at this idea about metabolic health and metabolic dysregulation. And it goes back to feedback regulation and what we're looking at when we're looking at homeostatic balance, optimal performance. What's missing in a lot of the discussion, this is where we have to be very careful about the quips and phrases that are played out for us or that are stated out for us. Metabolic health and metabolic function is necessary in order to have overall health. But the problem is that if I have a dysregulation taking place and I'm able to start to correct for that dysregulation, I have to reestablish normal feedback regulation, not just correct the dysregulation. And this is where we have to look at the impacts that diet, the impacts that exercise, the impacts that nutrition has on oxidative stress, the impacts that chronic inflammation have on the normal feedback mechanisms that are going to allow me to have optimal performance, and that optimal performance is going to allow me to have optimal health. The general tenet that we get from the metabolic health initiatives, particularly coming out from the people within the nominations for individuals within Health and Human Services, the Surgeon General that's being the physician that's being nominated for Surgeon General. The general idea that we're getting from these individuals is that if I completely change my diet, if I am eating quote unquote organic, if I am avoiding any of the sugars, if I'm avoiding any of the refined foods, if I'm avoiding, then I'm going to have normal metabolic functions. But that's not the case. And that's the problem with this idea about metabolic health as it's stipulated. And it goes back to the idea that if I have a dysregulation taking place, I can make changes within my lifestyle, and changes within my lifestyle will have one of the various cogs within all of the cogs: the environmental cog, the familial cog, the genetic cog, the social cog, the physiological cog, the hormonal cog. All of those cogs, all of those cogwheels spinning, are going to impact parts of body composition, parts of metabolic health, parts of overall health, parts of the essence of what my body is doing in terms of functioning. What the proponents of this metabolic health idea are doing is that they're basically saying it is one cog and one cog only that is going to be the root cause for overall health, for changing overall health, for getting rid of a chronic disease, without going back and looking at what are the factors, what are all of the factors that are coming into play that are going to lead to changes in metabolic function, and those changes in metabolic function that will either alleviate health issues or exacerbate health issues. And this is where we want to try to make stuff as simple as possible. But the problem is that by oversimplifying, we ignore the complexity of the problem. Within this idea about metabolic health, within this idea about metabolic fitness, comes secondary ideas stemming from that. And the one that has started to kind of take hold within the fitness side of the health and wellness is the idea about metabolic conditioning. And metabolic conditioning is something that is another catchphrase that goes hand in hand with this metabolic health idea that we are somehow needing to do exercise or make exercise programs that are going to stress the body so as to lead to distinct functional changes, and those distinct functional changes on the cellular level as it relates to metabolism, where the host of, or the foundation for, the idea in terms of metabolic health and the ideas in terms of metabolic conditioning have to deal with the bias about sugar and the bias about sugars in the diet, and how metabolism is set up in such a way that we are geared to not be using sugar for specific parts of our metabolism, without, once again, understanding metabolic process or understanding how metabolism changes throughout age. When we start looking at this idea about metabolic condition, we start looking at this idea about metabolic health, the ideas around them is about making sure that we are changing the stresses on the cells, on the body, that is going to lead to healthier, put quotes around that, mitochondria. And by creating healthier mitochondria, we will create healthier bodies. By changing diets, we're going to create healthier microbiome in the gut. And by creating a healthier microbiome in the gut, we're going to create a healthier body. Without realizing that the linkage between the gut and our overall health is correlative, there is some causal relationship that we do see within gut health and metabolic health that deal with inflammation signals coming from immune cells within the tissues of our intestines that can have an impact based off of the diet that we're having. But it's not necessarily the idea that is being presented by the proponents of this idea about metabolic health, about this idea about metabolic conditioning. Within the general argument for the metabolic health, for the metabolic conditioning, is that everything that we're doing is about how efficiently we are converting our foods, our stuff that we're eating, into energy. How efficiently are we utilizing that food in terms of energetic purposes, with ignoring the fact that a large proportion of our food is not about energy. It's about maintaining body tissues. It's about allowing tissues to grow when tissues need to grow. It's about making sure that we have the appropriate fuel sources for the body to do what the body needs to do. And it's the function, if we look at it in terms of what their proponents of this idea about metabolic health, about metabolic condition is doing, is about trying to look at spikes in glucose as if spikes in glucose is the end all be all for overall health, completely ignoring the fact that if I am going to exercise, I am going to get a spike in glucose. And that's going to come about because of what happens hormonally during exercise. It has nothing to do with my diet. It has everything to do with hormonal responses to exercise. And it doesn't matter whether I am a diabetic or not. Every person that does exercise will have spikes in glucose. Every person that eats will have spikes in insulin. That's because that's what happens to those things when we exercise and when we eat. And what ends up happening for people who are discussing these metabolic health aspects is that they are ignoring a lot of what is actually taking place in metabolism in order to focus on their bias that metabolism is about energy and energy metabolism, not about metabolism being the sum of all of the chemical reactions that we need in the body in order to maintain optimal performance. And this kind of goes hand in hand to the other kind of quip and phrase that has started to take hold within a lot of the healthcare discussions, and that is the idea about functional. And what does functional mean? And how does functional lay into this idea that we have to look at? When we start looking at this idea about functional, the functional medicine and the functional medical idea is the fact that the underlying causes of all of the diseases that we face is based off of the fact that we are not functioning the way that we're supposed to be functioning. That we are not utilizing a personalized approach to the medicine. That we are utilizing a coercive effect in terms of what we're doing in terms of medical practice, in terms of medical treatment. Once again, this is stuff that we have talked about, the stuff that I've researched, the stuff that I have written on in terms of the idea about self-motivated, self-selected behaviors versus coercive behaviors, and how we can utilize self-motivated, self-selected behaviors in order to generate the correct choices within all of the choices that we have available to us. But when we start looking at what the idea about functional medicine and functional health is that we are, by the definition that the people like to use for functional medicine, being a personalized, patient-centered approach to healthcare that focuses on addressing root causes of diseases rather than treating symptoms. But the problem is that the way in which the treatment comes out is that it's about looking at the symptoms and modifying lifestyles to minimize symptoms, as opposed to looking at what is the actual underlying root cause. The essence of functional medicine, based off of what the proponents are stipulating, is to restore, quote unquote, balance to the body, to somehow alleviate the DYS functional actions, the dysfunctional actions that are known to contribute to diseases. While we want to do that in terms of medical care, the holistic approach that usually takes place is not the holistic approach that would allow for self-motivated, self-selective patterns to come into play. It's addressing why someone might be ill, why someone might have a disease. If we look at what the approach happens to be in terms of the differential diagnosis, the identity of the root causes tend to focus on, particularly for chronic diseases, for chronic lifestyle diseases, for chronic inflammatory diseases, tend to focus on things like your diet, things like your exercise pattern, things like your lifestyle. But then the approach to treatment falls in line with the general bias that we see with the metabolic health initiatives that we hear and see. The idea that we're trying to manage stuff in normal healthcare is it's false. We're not trying to manage anything. Even the idea about the Health Management Organization, the HMO, we're not really trying to manage health. What we're trying to do is we're trying to make sure that we're optimally performing. We have optimal function. Because when we have optimal function, we're able to be disease-free. We're able to have normal metabolic actions. And by having normal metabolic actions, we're able to have normal homeostasis, normal optimal performance is taking place. And so when we start hearing people talk about functional medicine and being a functional medical practitioner within the discussions about overall health, what they're really saying is that they're going to look at an encompassing view of healthcare, an encompassing view of health that doesn't actually alleviate the biases that come into play when we start looking at quote unquote regular healthcare. The other avenue of this idea about functional comes into play when we start looking at exercise, and something that we talked about previously in terms of what does it mean to have functional exercise. Because you'll hear a lot about, oh, we're going to do this functional exercise routine, or oh, this gym does functional exercise. All exercise is functional. When we start looking at functional exercise, start looking at functional care, start looking at functional health, what we're talking about carryover from what we are doing to what we do in an everyday thing, in everyday life. What we're talking about functional medicine, we're talking about functional exercise. What we're talking about doing things, doing treatments, taking care of our overall health so that we're able to perform the way that we need to perform in order to do what we need to do on an everyday basis. Which means that, by definition, everything we're doing for healthcare, everything we're doing in exercise, as long as it has some sort of carryover to what we do on a regular basis, is functional. There's nothing special. There's nothing abnormal, nothing unusual about the way in which we go about doing exercise, the way in which we go about doing healthcare, that would make it unfunctional. That would be the opposite of functional. And so we start looking at these ideas about functional medicine. We start looking at these ideas about metabolic health or functional health or metabolic medicine. It's a lot of people selling things in using different words than what we're actually trying to do, what we're actually trying to say. And it's done in such a way to either sell something such as books or sell something such as programs. When we start looking at the root cause for a lot of these movements, it is not for the betterment of the individual, it's for the monetary gain for the practitioner. And that is something that we have to be very cognizant of when we start hearing a lot of these kind of quips and phrases, and we start looking at a lot of the jargons that are out there in terms of what is being pitched to us. Because there's money to be made in healthcare. There's money to be made in fitness. There's money to be made in wellness. People are constantly trying to sell stuff. It's nothing new. It's always been there. It's why I laugh when I hear the phrases "Make America Healthy Again," the MAHA movement. With the indication is that at some point in time, America must have been healthy. But the evidence that we have from all of the practices within healthcare, from all of the snake oil that has been sold and continues to be sold, tells us that it was never healthy, that we're constantly trying to become healthier, that we're willing to look at distinct things. There are changes that have happened over the last half century. There are changes in disease onsets that we've seen, where it's not about the communicable diseases as much. It's more about the non-communicable diseases. It's about the metabolic diseases that come into play. And a lot of that is not about what we're doing currently. A lot of it is about the environmental stresses that grandparents and great-grandparents faced. And the fact that we've had changes within genetic and epigenetic regulators that led to changes in the way in which enzymes, the way in which hormones are being produced, the way in which metabolic processes, the way in which metabolism is taking place, that leads to a lot of the metabolic issues that we see currently within healthcare, within fitness, that we're trying to correct by changing lifestyle methods, by changing diet, by changing exercise. The problem with a lot of the quips and phrases, the problem with a lot of the jargon is that we tend to make it a quick fix, excessively simplistic idea that this one thing and this one thing only is going to be both the cause of and cure for the problem. And the problem is that the way in which the body works is too complex for that single thing to take place. It's not a single gene. It's not a single hormone. It's not a single enzyme. It's not a single metabolic pathway that causes us to become unhealthy, that leads to us being healthy. If we want to look at it in terms of the lifestyle interventions, the lifestyle medicine ideas, which is basically what the metabolic health, the metabolic medicine, the functional health, the functional medicine, the metabolic conditioning, the functional conditioning, the functional exercise, what all of them are trying to do is they're trying to get to how can lifestyle and lifestyle changes lead to a betterment in my homeostatic balance, my feedback regulation that keeps me in optimal level. And we can do that as long as we see the exercise, as long as we see the dietary changes as being a reduction in overall stress. The stress levels that we face, from environmental stresses to dietary stresses to lifestyle stresses, is what is causing a lot of the metabolic issues that we see. One of the things that we look at when we look at the continuum of fitness and fatness is that as I become more active, regardless of what happens to my actual body composition, is that I start becoming healthier. And the reason why I start becoming healthier is because inflammation starts to drop. It's about managing chronic inflammation more than changing any of the other signals that either the metabolic health proponents or the functional health proponents are talking about. And so when we start looking at these ideas, we start listening to the quips and phrases that get kind of put into the ideas about metabolic health, the ideas about functional health. The fact that regardless of whether they are going to be a proponent of functional health or a proponent of metabolic health, a proponent of functional conditioning or a proponent of metabolic conditioning, the whole idea here is that it's somehow going to be a personalized approach. And that personalized approach is somehow going to empower you as the person to make the choices that align with what your values happen to be. The problem is that the people who are doing the prescriptions are not taking into account that white coat episode, the white coat effect, the effect that they are the authority on the choices. When we start looking at some of the way in which choices are being made and choices are being prescribed, a lot of the metabolic health side of stuff is avoid sugars at all costs. Eat only organic foods, as if non-organic foods are somehow unhealthy. Avoid sugars because sugars are going to cause insulin spikes, even though you have to have a certain level of sugar consumption in order to spike insulin from a meal. And that certain level is you have to have greater than 1.2 grams per kilogram of body mass, about 0.6 grams per pound of body mass, in order to get that insulin to spike, strictly from what you're eating. And all of the foods that all of these people are telling us to avoid don't have enough sugar in them to cause the insulin spikes by themselves. There is an indication for having elevated glucose levels if I am unhealthy. But it's not because of my diet, it's because of the change in metabolic signals that lead to the elevated glucose levels. There is an indication to having higher amounts of inflammation with higher amounts of body fat. That indication, there's both a correlative as well as a linked, as well as a slight causal relationship. And the causal relationship has to deal with hormones, and hormones coming from the fat cells, coming from the adipose tissue, that trigger inflammation from the immune cells found within the adipose tissue. The indication that we have this elevated glucose when we are over fat, the elevated glucose when we are sick, the elevated glucose that we see with people who have diabetes, has led to a faulty assumption, a faulty conclusion, an illogical conclusion that any glucose that I consume, any refined sugar that I consume, is automatically unhealthy. And that is the problem that we get when we have these people taking the metabolic dysregulation that we see with chronic inflammation, the metabolic dysregulation that we see with oxidative stress, and making it as if it's something that happens under normal conditions, which it doesn't. And that's where the metabolic health issue, that's where the functional health issue starts to fall apart. And so we start hearing these quips and phrases, we start hearing this jargon around metabolic health. We start hearing these quips and phrases, this jargon around functional health. The whole idea behind both of those health movements is to do lifestyle interventions as a means to reduce chronic inflammation. It's a good idea. It's an idea that we've written on. It's an idea that I've published on. It's an idea that I've been researching on for almost 20 years now. And it's something that is true. The application that they have in terms of what they are trying to sell is more of a biased approach than it is an unbiased, realistic approach. Well, thanks for listening. Hopefully get a little bit out of the conversation here on functional and metabolic health issues and some of the phrases and jargons that come in with those topics. If you have other topics that you'd like us to discuss, please make sure to leave it to us in comments. We're more than happy to discuss those. Please make sure that you have subscribed. Please make sure you give us that 5-star rating, that big thumbs up. Let us know that we're doing a good job. Make sure you're subscribed. Make sure you're following us here on the podcast as well as on YouTube. The written stuff in Substack, as well as the quick takes that get posted into Instagram and to Threads. Please stay tuned for further discussions on physiology, further discussions on the science of how to be healthy, further discussions on how we can get through all of the misinformation and disinformation that we see both within normal media as well as within the social media feeds that bombard us on a daily basis.